Welcome to a story that begins not with Babylon itself, but with a question that has haunted historians for millennia. How did a small, unremarkable settlement of nomadic Amorites, founded on the muddy banks of the Euphrates River around 1894 before Christ, transform into the most legendary city the ancient world would ever know? How did a place so insignificant that it barely appeared on maps for its first century of existence become synonymous with civilization itself, its very name meaning Gate of the Gods? This is the complete story of Babylon, and we will journey together through nearly 3,000 years of human history. We begin long before Babylon existed, in the world's first cities, where Sumerians invented writing on clay tablets and built towering ziggurats to reach their gods. We will witness Sargon of Akkad forge the first empire in human history, watch the Amorite chieftain Sumuabum lay the first humble bricks of what would become Babylon, and stand beside Hammurabi as he carves 282 laws into black diorite stone, creating a legal revolution that echoes in courtrooms today. We will walk through centuries of conquest and resurrection, watching Hittite warriors sack the city, Kassite kings rebuild it, and Assyrian armies burn it to ash. And then we will witness the impossible, Babylon rising again under Nebuchadnezzar II, greater than ever before, its Ishtar Gate blazing with blue-glazed lions, its ziggurat inspiring legends of towers reaching heaven, its gardens becoming wonders of the world. We will explore the streets where merchants haggled, temples where priests read omens in sheep livers, and schools where scribes learned the mathematics that still shape our circles and our clocks. We will watch Jerusalem fall and its people march into exile. And finally, we will see Persian armies enter through dry riverbeds, ending an empire without a single battle. This matters because Babylon gave us the 7-day week, the 60-minute hour, the 360-degree circle. Its laws influenced every legal code that followed. Its astronomy became the foundation of science. Its stories became our myths. If you appreciate complete journeys through the rise and fall of civilizations, please subscribe so you do not miss our continuing explorations. Each week, we bring you the full story of a world that shaped history. Let us begin this journey now, in the marshlands of ancient Sumer, where humanity first learned to build cities. The rivers come first, two great arteries of brown water descending from distant mountains, carving their slow paths through flat, sun-scorched earth. The Tigris runs swift and unpredictable. The Euphrates moves slower, gentler, spreading across the plain in braided channels that shift with the seasons. Between them lies a land the Greeks would later call Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Here, in marshes thick with reeds and mud flats baked hard by summer heat, humanity first learned to build cities. Around 3,500 years before the Common Era, something unprecedented emerges along the lower Euphrates. Small farming villages that have existed for millennia begin to transform. Population concentrates. Mud brick structures rise higher. Temples appear at the center of settlements, their platforms growing taller with each generation. The village of Uruk expands beyond anything the world has seen. Within centuries, 40,000 people crowd within its walls, making it the largest human settlement on Earth. The Sumerians create this world. They speak a language unlike any other, unrelated to the Semitic tongues of their neighbors, or the Indo-European languages spreading across distant steppes. They call their land Kengir, the civilized country, and they build it from river mud and reed bundles. Their cities rise from the alluvial plain like islands of order amid wilderness. Ur, Eridu, Nippur, Lagash, each with its patron deity, each with its ziggurat climbing toward heaven. The temple dominates everything. These stepped towers of mud brick, whitewashed and gleaming, serve as the earthly dwelling of the gods. Priests manage vast estates in the deity's name. Farmers deliver grain to temple storehouses. Weavers produce textiles for temple trade. The economy flows through sacred precincts where scribes track every transaction. Around 2,900 years before the Common Era, these scribes develop something revolutionary. Pressing wedge-shaped reeds into wet clay, they create cuneiform, the first true writing system. What begins as simple accounting marks evolves into literature, law, and history itself. The legendary king Gilgamesh rules Uruk during these early centuries. Later poets will sing of his quest for immortality, his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, his journey to the edge of the world. These stories, pressed into clay tablets, become humanity's first great literature. They speak of floods sent by angry gods, of gardens of the divine, of the eternal human struggle against death, themes that will echo through every civilization to follow. Sumerian city-states war constantly among themselves. Lagash battles Umma over irrigation rights. Ur rises to dominate, then falls. Uruk reclaims supremacy, then loses it again. The land knows no lasting unity, only shifting alliances and endless conflict between proud cities. Yet through all this turmoil, the foundations of civilization deepen. Astronomers track the movements of stars. Mathematicians develop a number system based on 60 that still shapes how humanity measures time and angles. Physicians catalogue diseases and treatments. Architects perfect the arch and the dome. By 2,300 years before the Common Era, a new power rises from the north. Sargon of Akkad, a Semitic ruler, conquers the Sumerian cities and forges history's first empire. His dynasty lasts barely 2 centuries before collapsing under pressure from mountain peoples. The Sumerians briefly revive under the third dynasty of Ur, building ziggurats of unprecedented scale. But by 2,000 years before the Common Era, their political power fades forever. The Sumerian language becomes a dead tongue, preserved only by scholars. Yet everything they created endures. Their writing system spreads across the ancient world. Their gods transform into the deities of later peoples. Their legal traditions, their astronomical observations, their mathematical innovations, all pass to successor civilizations. Along the middle Euphrates, a small settlement called Babylon begins to grow. It inherits everything the Sumerians built. It will transform that inheritance into something the world has never forgotten. The world's first empire rises from the northern plains. Around 2334 years before the Common Era, a man whose birth name history does not record takes the throne name Sargon, meaning the true king. His origins remain deliberately obscured by legend. Later texts claim his mother placed him in a basket of rushes and set him adrift on the Euphrates. A gardener found him. The goddess Ishtar loved him. These stories serve political purpose, transforming humble beginnings into divine destiny. Sargon begins as a cupbearer to the king of Kish, a position of intimate trust within the royal household. Through means lost to history, he seizes power and establishes his capital at Akkad, a city whose exact location archaeologists have never found. From this vanished metropolis, he launches campaigns that shatter the existing order of competing city-states. The Akkadian military machine differs fundamentally from Sumerian warfare. Sargon maintains a standing army of 5,400 soldiers who eat bread in his presence daily. These professional warriors replace the seasonal militias of earlier kings. They carry composite bows capable of striking enemies before close combat begins. Their bronze weapons gleam with superior metallurgy. They move fast, strike hard, and answer only to Sargon. City after city falls. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Ummah. The great Sumerian centers that dominated southern Mesopotamia for 1,000 years submit to Akkadian rule. Sargon claims to have conquered 34 battles, washing his weapons in the lower sea. His empire eventually stretches from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, from the mountains of Anatolia to the deserts of Arabia. The administrative innovations prove as revolutionary as the conquests. Akkadian becomes the language of empire, spreading across the ancient world as the tongue of diplomacy and commerce. Sargon installs his daughter Enheduanna as high priestess of the moon god at Ur, merging religious and political authority. She becomes history's first named author, composing hymns that survive 4,000 years. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, pushes the empire to its greatest extent. He takes the unprecedented step of declaring himself a living god, adding the divine determinative to his name. The famous victory stele shows him ascending a mountain, wearing the horned helmet of divinity, trampling enemies beneath his feet. No Mesopotamian king before him dared claim such status. But empires built on conquest require constant military pressure. The Gutians, mountain peoples from the Zagros ranges, begin raiding the weakened periphery. Internal rebellions multiply. Around 2154 years before the Common Era, Akkadian power collapses. The empire that invented imperial rule endures barely 2 centuries. Yet the Akkadian achievement transforms everything that follows. Future kings measure themselves against Sargon's legend. The idea that one ruler might unite all Mesopotamia under single authority becomes the permanent dream of ambitious monarchs. The administrative techniques, the military organization, the concept of universal kingship all pass into the inheritance of successor states. Centuries later, a small city called Babylon will claim this legacy and surpass it. The centuries following Akkadian collapse bring fragmentation and renewal. Sumerian cities reassert independence. The third dynasty of Ur rises around 2112 years before the Common Era, rebuilding centralized authority across southern Mesopotamia. For a century, Ur dominates, constructing massive ziggurats and maintaining elaborate bureaucracies. But pressure builds along the western margins of settled lands. From the Syrian steppe come the Amorites. Sumerian scribes call them wanderers, people without houses, people who eat raw meat, people who know no burial. These pastoral nomads speak a Semitic language distinct from both Sumerian and Akkadian. They move with their flocks along seasonal routes, trading wool and livestock with settled communities. Gradually, they filter into Mesopotamian cities as laborers, soldiers, mercenaries. Some rise to positions of influence. Others establish small chieftainships along the middle Euphrates. Around 1940 years before the Common Era, the third dynasty of Ur collapses under combined pressure from Elamite invasion and Amorite infiltration. The old order shatters. Across Mesopotamia, ambitious leaders carve out independent territories. Isin and Larsa compete for Sumerian heartland dominance. Eshnunna controls the Diyala region. Mari commands the middle Euphrates trade routes. Assur emerges in the north. Dozens of smaller city-states jostle for advantage in this fragmented landscape. Among these competing powers, one settlement remains utterly insignificant. Babylon sits on the Euphrates roughly 80 kilometers south of modern Baghdad. The name derives from Akkadian words meaning gate of the gods. Before the Amorite period, it appears rarely in surviving records. No great temples distinguish it. No legendary kings claim it. The site offers modest advantages: river access, fertile surrounding farmland, position along trade routes connecting north and south. Nothing more. Around 1894 years before the Common Era, an Amorite chieftain named Sumuabum establishes independent rule over this minor settlement. He becomes the founder of what later generations call the First Dynasty of Babylon. His reign lasts 14 years. He builds defensive walls, a practical necessity in an age of constant warfare between neighboring powers. He constructs or repairs irrigation channels, the lifeblood of any Mesopotamian community. He establishes the administrative foundations that successors will expand. The early Babylonian kings face enormous challenges. Larger, wealthier, more prestigious cities surround them. Isin and Larsa possess ancient temples and established legitimacy. Eshnunna commands superior military resources. Mari controls lucrative trade networks. Babylon must survive through careful diplomacy, strategic marriages, opportunistic alliances, and patient accumulation of strength. Sumuabum's successors continue this cautious expansion. Sumulael reigns 36 years, extending territorial control and strengthening fortifications. Sabium rules 14 years. Apilsin governs 18 years. Sin-Muballit reigns 20 years, finally capturing the important city of Isin. Each generation adds incrementally to Babylonian power, prestige, and territory. The city itself grows during these decades. Mud brick walls rise higher and thicker. Temples to Marduk, the city's patron deity, receive embellishment. Canal networks extend into surrounding agricultural lands. Merchants establish trading connections. Scribes adapt cuneiform traditions to local administrative needs. A distinctive Babylonian identity begins crystallizing from the fusion of Amorite leadership and Mesopotamian urban culture. By 1793, years before the Common Era, Babylon has transformed from insignificant settlement to regional power. It remains far from dominant. Rim-Sin of Larsa controls most of southern Mesopotamia. Shamshi-Adad commands a powerful northern kingdom. Yet Babylon has survived, grown, and positioned itself for future opportunity. The foundations are laid. The dynasty is established. The city awaits the king who will transform it into the center of an empire. The throne passes to young hands in 1792, years before the Common Era. Sin-Muballit, aging and perhaps ailing, yields power to his son. Hammurabi ascends as the sixth king of the Babylonian dynasty, inheriting a city-state of modest regional importance surrounded by far more powerful rivals. He is perhaps 18 years old, possibly younger. The chronicles record his accession without fanfare. No one yet suspects that this young ruler will transform not only Babylon, but the very concept of kingship itself. The geopolitical landscape confronting the new king demands careful navigation. To the south, Rim-Sin of Larsa controls the ancient Sumerian heartland, commanding resources and prestige accumulated over 6 decades of rule. To the north and east, Shamshi-Adad has forged a powerful Assyrian kingdom, stretching from the Tigris to the Euphrates. Eshnunna guards the eastern trade routes. Elam looms beyond the mountains. Mari dominates the middle Euphrates, controlling vital commerce flowing from distant lands. Babylon sits among giants, vulnerable to any of them. Hammurabi's early reign reveals strategic patience rather than reckless ambition. The year names recording his first decade speak of canal construction, temple restoration, throne dedications. He strengthens Babylon's walls. He improves irrigation systems feeding surrounding farmland. He honors the gods with appropriate offerings. These are not the actions of a conqueror, but of a consolidator, a young king building internal strength before external expansion. Diplomatic correspondence preserved on clay tablets illuminates his methods. Hammurabi cultivates relationships with neighboring powers, exchanging messengers, negotiating agreements, balancing threats against opportunities. He positions Babylon as a reliable partner rather than an aggressive threat. When Shamshi-Adad's Assyrian kingdom fragments following that ruler's death around 1776 years before the Common Era, Hammurabi observes carefully but does not immediately strike. He waits for the proper moment. The alliance with Rim-Sin proves particularly significant during these formative years. The two kings cooperate against common enemies, sharing intelligence, coordinating military actions. Hammurabi learns the art of coalition warfare, understanding how temporary partnerships can achieve objectives impossible for single powers. These lessons will prove invaluable when he eventually turns against his former ally. Military campaigns begin cautiously. Hammurabi secures territories immediately surrounding Babylon, absorbing smaller city-states through combination of force and diplomacy. Each conquest strengthens his resource base. Each victory enhances his reputation. The army grows more experienced, more confident. Officers learn to execute complex operations. Supply systems improve. The machinery of imperial expansion develops through practical application. By 1770 years before the Common Era, Hammurabi has ruled for over 2 decades. He is no longer the untested youth who inherited a vulnerable throne. He commands a disciplined army, a productive economy, and a network of diplomatic relationships. Babylon has grown stronger while rivals have weakened. Shamshi-Adad is dead. His sons quarrel over fragments of his kingdom. Rim-Sin has aged, his grip on power perhaps loosening. The moment for decisive action approaches. The transformation from regional king to imperial conqueror awaits. Hammurabi has spent 22 years preparing, watching, building. The patience that seemed like weakness was actually strategy. The alliances that seemed like submission were actually positioning. The young king who inherited a modest city-state now commands the resources and experience necessary for conquest. Babylon stands ready to become an empire. The conquests begin with calculated precision. In 1770 years before the Common Era, Hammurabi moves against Larsa, the southern power that has dominated Lower Mesopotamia for generations. Rim-Sin, now elderly after decades on his throne, cannot match the disciplined Babylonian forces. City after city falls. The irrigation networks that sustained Larsa's agricultural wealth now serve Babylon. Within 2 years, the entire southern plain acknowledges Hammurabi as overlord. But military victory alone does not satisfy this king. Something unprecedented emerges from the royal workshops. Craftsmen labor over a pillar of black diorite, nearly 8 feet tall, polished to gleaming darkness. At its crown, artisans carve a scene of divine authority. The sun god Shamash, seated on his throne, extends the rod and ring of kingship to Hammurabi, who stands in reverent attention. Below this image, scribes inscribe thousands of cuneiform signs in neat columns, covering the entire surface of the stone. 282 laws take shape in the ancient Akkadian language. These are not abstract principles, but specific cases, practical rulings addressing the countless disputes that arise in complex urban society. A builder whose house collapses and kills the owner's son shall have his own son put to death. A surgeon whose bronze knife causes a patient's death shall have his hand cut off. A woman accused of adultery may prove her innocence by throwing herself into the river, letting the gods judge through survival or drowning. The code addresses every station of life. Prices for hiring oxen, wages for field laborers, fees for physicians treating different social classes, penalties for theft varying by the victim's status. Slaves have certain protections. Women can own property, conduct business, divorce unfaithful husbands. Merchants must maintain honest weights. Innkeepers who water their beer face drowning. The law reaches into homes, fields, workshops, and temples. This is not the first written law. Sumerian kings produced legal collections centuries earlier, but Hammurabi's code achieves something new in its comprehensiveness, its public display, its claim to universal justice. The stele stands in the Temple of Marduk, where any literate person can read it, where priests can cite its provisions, where the king's justice becomes permanent and visible. Copies travel to conquered cities. Local judges receive instructions to apply these standards. The empire binds itself together not merely through military garrisons, but through shared legal principles. A merchant from Sippar conducting business in can expect the same rules to govern his contracts. A farmer near the Persian Gulf and another near the northern mountains both understand what penalties await thieves, what rights protect creditors. The prologue declares Hammurabi chosen by the gods to make justice prevail, to destroy the wicked, to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. The epilogue invokes curses upon any future king who alters or ignores these judgments. Between these grand declarations lies the practical machinery of civilization. How to resolve disputes, punish crimes, regulate commerce, protect property, and maintain social order across diverse populations. Hammurabi continues expanding until his death around 1750 years before the Common Era. His empire stretches from the Persian Gulf northward to Assyrian territories, encompassing the entire fertile crescent of Mesopotamia. But his greatest monument is not territorial. The black stone outlives every boundary, every dynasty, every empire. Elamite raiders will eventually carry it to Susa as plunder, where archaeologists will discover it over 3,000 years later. The principle endures longer than the stone itself. Written law, publicly displayed, applying across social boundaries, claiming divine sanction while addressing earthly concerns. Every subsequent legal tradition carries echoes of this innovation. The code does not merely record Babylonian customs, it announces that civilization requires visible, permanent, accessible justice. The empire reaches its zenith in 1750 years before the Common Era. Babylon transforms from conquering power into administrative center, its authority radiating outward through networks of roads, rivers, and royal messengers. The city itself swells with tribute, captives, and ambitious men seeking fortune in the shadow of Hammurabi's throne. The conquest of Murray marks the culmination of military expansion. This ancient city on the Middle Euphrates, ruled by Zimri Lim from a palace containing over 300 rooms, falls to Babylonian forces after years of diplomatic maneuvering. The palace archives thousands of clay tablets recording correspondence between kings, reveal the intricate web of alliances and betrayals that characterized this age. Hammurabi orders the walls demolished, the palace stripped. Mari never recovers its former glory. The administrative machinery that governs this empire operates with remarkable sophistication. Provincial governors receive detailed instructions from the capital. Tax collectors assess harvests, livestock, and trade goods according to standardized rates. Royal judges travel circuits, hearing appeals and enforcing the code. Scribes copy legal decisions onto tablets, creating precedents for future cases. The bureaucracy requires literacy, numeracy, and absolute loyalty to the throne. Trade routes converge on Babylon from every direction. From the Persian Gulf come copper, pearls, and exotic woods. From the mountains of Anatolia come silver and tin, essential for bronze production. From the Iranian plateau come lapis lazuli and carnelian. Caravans cross the Syrian desert carrying textiles, oils, and manufactured goods. The city becomes a marketplace where merchants from distant lands exchange commodities and information. The temples of Babylon multiply and expand. Marduk, the city's patron deity, rises in prominence as Babylon's power grows. His temple complex, the Esagila, receives lavish donations from the king and wealthy citizens. Priests perform daily rituals, feeding and clothing the divine statues, interpreting omens, maintaining the cosmic order that legitimizes royal authority. The religious calendar structures the year around festivals, sacrifices, and agricultural cycles. The ziggurat of Babylon, though not yet the massive structure of later centuries, already dominates the urban landscape. This stepped tower, built of millions of mud bricks, connects earth to heaven. At its summit, a shrine houses the god during sacred ceremonies. The construction requires coordinated labor, precise engineering, and enormous resources. It announces Babylonian power to every traveler approaching the city. The irrigation systems that sustain the empire demand constant maintenance. Canals branch from the Euphrates, carrying water to fields miles from the river. Dikes and levees control seasonal flooding. Administrators allocate water rights, settle disputes between farmers, organize labor for repairs. The agricultural surplus that feeds the cities, supports the armies, and finances the temples depends entirely on this hydraulic infrastructure. The palace workshops produce goods for royal consumption and diplomatic exchange. Metalworkers cast bronze weapons and tools. Jewelers set precious stones in gold and silver. Weavers create textiles of extraordinary fineness. Perfumers blend oils and resins. These luxury products travel as gifts to allied kings, as bribes to potential enemies, as rewards for loyal servants. The empire's reach extends through correspondence as much as conquest. Clay tablets sealed in clay envelopes travel between courts. Kings address each other as brothers, negotiate marriages, demand respect. The diplomatic language follows precise conventions. Insults and compliments carry political weight. Hammurabi's scribes maintain archives of incoming and outgoing correspondence, creating institutional memory. The legal system established by the code now operates across the empire. Local customs persist, but royal law provides a framework for resolving disputes that cross community boundaries. Contracts invoke divine witnesses and royal authority. Property rights, inheritance rules, and commercial regulations create predictability for merchants and landowners. Yet the empire contains its own fragility. Hammurabi rules through personal authority, military reputation, and administrative competence. The provinces remain distinct, their populations loyal to local traditions and deities. The conquered cities remember independence. The system depends entirely on the king's continued vigor and attention. The palace rises at the heart of Babylon, its mud-brick walls thick enough to hold the weight of empire. Within these chambers, power takes physical form. Hammurabi sits upon a throne carved with celestial symbols, receiving governors, hearing petitions, dispensing justice. The royal court operates as the nervous system of empire, every decision radiating outward through messengers and sealed tablets to the distant provinces. The daily rhythms of palace life follow precise protocols. Dawn brings the king's ritual purification, water poured over royal hands by attendants trained from childhood. Priests enter to recite morning prayers, invoking Shamash, the sun god, to illuminate the king's judgments. The throne room fills with officials bearing reports from canal inspectors, tax collectors, military commanders. Each audience follows established precedent, the king's responses recorded by scribes who kneel at low tables. The palace complex sprawls across several acres, its courtyards connecting administrative wings, royal apartments, treasury vaults, and archive rooms. Servants number in hundreds, their duties precisely defined. Cooks prepare royal meals according to sacred recipes. Weavers produce garments befitting divine kingship. Musicians practice hymns for state occasions. The household consumes vast quantities of grain, oil, and meat, its provisioning requiring dedicated bureaucratic attention. Yet the palace cannot stand alone. Across the sacred precinct rises the ziggurat of Marduk, its stepped terraces climbing toward heaven. The temple complex of Esagila houses the god's earthly dwelling, its inner sanctum accessible only to the highest priests. Here divine power resides, the force that legitimizes all royal authority. The relationship between palace and temple defines Babylonian civilization. The king rules as Marduk's chosen instrument, his victories attributed to divine favor, his laws presented as divine wisdom. The priests maintain the god's cult, performing daily rituals that sustain cosmic order. Neither institution can function without the other. The king provides resources, protection, and political authority. The temple provides legitimacy, divine sanction, and the ritual framework that holds society together. The high priest of Marduk commands enormous influence. His blessing validates royal decisions. His interpretation of omens guides military campaigns. His festivals structure the agricultural year. The priesthood controls vast estates, workshops, and commercial enterprises. Temple slaves work fields and manufactories. Temple scribes maintain records stretching back centuries. The institution possesses institutional memory that outlasts any individual reign. The religious calendar organizes Babylonian time. The New Year festival, celebrated in the first month, brings the king to Esagila for ritual humiliation and renewal. He surrenders his regalia, receives symbolic blows, confesses his devotion to Marduk. The god then restores his authority for another year. This annual ceremony reminds everyone that royal power derives from divine grant, not personal right. Monthly rituals mark lunar phases. Daily offerings feed the gods their meals of bread, beer, and roasted meat. The statues receive clothing changes, their garments washed and replaced according to season. Incense burns continuously. Hymns echo through temple corridors. The priests maintain an unbroken cycle of worship that connects earthly Babylon to heavenly realms. Divine kingship carries obligations beyond ritual. The king must maintain justice, protect the weak, defeat enemies, and ensure prosperity. Failure in any domain suggests divine displeasure. Drought, plague, or military defeat raises questions about royal worthiness. The priests interpret such signs, their readings carrying political weight. A king who loses priestly support faces dangerous isolation. The system creates mutual dependence and mutual suspicion. Kings seek to control temple appointments. Priests guard institutional autonomy. Both sides understand that open conflict would destroy the legitimacy that sustains them both. The balance holds through careful negotiation, shared interests, and the weight of tradition that neither side dares openly challenge. Beyond the palace walls and temple precincts, the city breathes with 10,000 ordinary lives. The streets of Babylon wind between mud-brick houses, narrow passages where donkeys laden with goods press past merchants, where children dart between adults, where the smell of baking bread mingles with less pleasant odors from open drains. This is where most Babylonians exist, far from royal audiences and priestly rituals, concerned with simpler matters of survival, family, and modest prosperity. The houses cluster together, sharing walls to conserve precious building materials. Most families occupy 2 or 3 rooms arranged around small courtyards open to the sky. Wealthier households add second stories, their upper chambers catching evening breezes above the stifling streets. The courtyards serve as kitchens, workshops, and gathering spaces. Clay ovens squat in corners, their fires fed with dried reeds and animal dung. Women grind grain on stone querns, the rhythmic scraping a constant background sound of domestic life. Markets occupy designated squares throughout the city. Merchants spread their wares on reed mats or wooden tables. Grain sellers measure barley into standardized containers, the weights and measures regulated by royal decree. Textile merchants display woolen cloth in various grades, from rough workman's fabric to fine weaves destined for wealthy households. Potters arrange vessels of every size, from massive storage jars to delicate drinking cups. The haggling follows ancient patterns, buyers and sellers performing negotiations that their grandparents would recognize. The breweries operate throughout residential quarters, their distinctive smell marking their presence. Beer serves as staple beverage, safer than water drawn from canals that carry both irrigation and waste. Women traditionally control brewing, their knowledge passed through generations. The process transforms barley into liquid nourishment, the resulting drink consumed daily by all classes. Taverns serve stronger varieties, their establishments sometimes doubling as places of prostitution, regulated but not prohibited by law. Textile production employs thousands. Women spin wool into thread using simple drop spindles, their fingers never still during daylight hours. Weavers work at wooden looms, creating cloth that serves both domestic needs and export trade. The finest textiles command high prices in distant markets. Dyers use plants and minerals to create colors, their workshops recognizable by stained hands and pungent chemical smells. This industry provides income for families across all social levels. Family law governs domestic arrangements with surprising sophistication. Marriage contracts specify property rights, divorce conditions, and inheritance provisions. Women retain ownership of their dowries, can conduct business independently, and may initiate divorce under certain circumstances. Children belong legally to their fathers, but mothers exercise considerable practical authority within households. Extended families often share compounds, grandparents, parents, and children living in adjacent rooms. Slavery exists as accepted institution, though Babylonian slavery differs from later forms. Debt drives most enslavement, families selling members to satisfy creditors. Slaves retain certain rights, can own property, conduct business, and purchase their freedom. Temple slaves serve religious institutions, their status hereditary, but not necessarily harsh. Foreign captives from military campaigns enter the system, their children eventually assimilating into the broader population. Commerce flows through established channels. Silver serves as primary currency, weighed rather than coined. Merchants extend credit, charge interest, and maintain careful records on clay tablets. Partnership agreements distribute risk across multiple investors. Caravans depart for distant lands, their organizers calculating profits against dangers. The economy operates on trust networks, reputation determining access to credit and commercial opportunity. The streets grow quiet as darkness falls, oil lamps flickering in windows, families gathering for evening meals. Another day ending in the city that calls itself the Gate of the Gods. The tablet house stands in morning shadow, its courtyard filled with boys seated cross-legged on reed mats. Clay tablets rest on their laps, still damp from preparation. A senior scribe moves among them, his stylus demonstrating the proper angle for pressing wedge-shaped marks into soft clay. These students will spend years mastering cuneiform, the writing system inherited from Sumerian predecessors and adapted for Akkadian speech. Most will become record keepers, contract writers, letter composers. A few will ascend to higher knowledge. The curriculum follows ancient patterns. Students begin by copying simple signs, then word lists, then phrases. They memorize lexical texts organizing the world into categories, types of fish, varieties of wood, names of professions, lists of gods. This taxonomic impulse reflects deeper intellectual ambitions. To name something is to understand it. To organize knowledge is to master reality. Mathematics emerges from practical necessity, transformed into abstract beauty. Babylonian scribes inherit the base 60 system from Sumerian accountants who needed to divide grain rations among workers. 60 divides evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30, making calculations elegant where base 10 stumbles. This system will survive millennia, persisting in modern measurements of time and angle. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle, all echo decisions made in Mesopotamian tablet houses. The mathematical tablets reveal sophisticated understanding. Scribes calculate areas of irregular fields, volumes of granaries, interest on loans compounding over years. They solve what later ages will call quadratic equations, finding unknown quantities through systematic procedures. A famous tablet lists Pythagorean triples, demonstrating knowledge of the relationship between sides of right triangles more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras. This is not primitive fumbling toward truth, but confident mastery of mathematical relationships. Astronomy develops from religious obligation. The gods speak through celestial signs, eclipses, planetary conjunctions, unusual star positions, all carry divine messages requiring interpretation. Priests stationed on ziggurat platforms observe the night sky systematically, recording positions of moon, sun, and wandering stars against fixed constellations. These observations accumulate across generations, creating databases of celestial behavior spanning centuries. The omen literature grows vast. Thousands of tablets record correlations between celestial events and earthly outcomes. If the moon appears surrounded by a halo, certain consequences follow. If Venus rises at particular times, kings should expect specific fortunes. Modern observers might dismiss this as superstition, but the observational foundation proves remarkably accurate. Babylonian astronomers predict lunar eclipses with precision, track planetary cycles, and develop mathematical models describing celestial motion. The zodiac takes shape in these observations. 12 constellations marking the sun's annual path become standardized, their names and boundaries established. Astrology and astronomy remain unified, the same observers serving both predictive science and religious interpretation. The separation between these disciplines lies far in the future. Medical knowledge follows similar patterns. Diagnostic texts catalogue symptoms and their meanings. Some tablets describe treatments, herbal remedies, surgical procedures. Others interpret illness as divine punishment requiring ritual response. The physician and the exorcist work alongside each other. Their approach is complementary rather than contradictory. Literary traditions flourish in the tablet houses. The Epic of Gilgamesh reaches its standard form, its 12 tablets recounting the legendary king's adventures, his friendship with Enkidu, his quest for immortality, his ultimate acceptance of human limitation. Creation myths explain how Marduk defeated primordial chaos and fashioned the world from the body of the slain goddess Tiamat. These narratives encode theological truths, political legitimacy, and philosophical reflection on human existence. The scribal profession carries prestige and responsibility. These men preserve knowledge across generations, copying ancient texts, composing new works, maintaining the intellectual heritage that distinguishes civilization from barbarism. Their clay tablets, fired or sun-dried, will outlast the buildings that housed them, carrying Babylonian thought across millennia to future civilizations that will build upon foundations laid in these quiet courtyards, where students practice their wedge-shaped marks. The storm gathers in the north, beyond the mountains where Anatolia rises cold and distant from the Mesopotamian plain. The Hittites have watched Babylon for generations, their kingdom growing strong in lands where iron ore lies hidden in hillsides and horses run wild across highland plateaus. Their warriors carry weapons of bronze, but their ambitions reach toward the wealthy cities of the south, toward the legendary riches of the land between two rivers. The year is 1595 before the Common Era. Babylon has weakened since the death of Hammurabi, his successors struggling to hold together an empire built on one man's genius. The dynasty that once commanded tribute from the Persian Gulf to the upper Euphrates now controls little beyond the city walls and their immediate hinterland. Provincial governors have declared independence. Trade routes have shifted. The treasury that once overflowed with silver and gold now struggles to pay soldiers and maintain temples. King Mursili I leads his army down from the Anatolian highlands, following the Euphrates River through territories that offer little resistance. His forces move with terrifying speed, bypassing fortified cities, striking deep into the heart of Mesopotamia. The Hittite war machine operates differently from the armies Babylon has faced before. These warriors fight from chariots pulled by horses bred for war. their mobility overwhelming defensive positions designed to resist infantry assault. The walls of Babylon, those massive mud-brick fortifications that have stood for centuries, cannot withstand the onslaught. The city falls with shocking swiftness, its defenders scattered, its gates breached. Hittite soldiers pour through streets where merchants once haggled and children once played. The palace that housed Hammurabi's descendants burns. The tablet houses where scribes preserved ancient wisdom collapse into rubble. The invaders seek specific treasures. They storm the Esagila temple complex, pushing past terrified priests who throw themselves before the sanctuary doors. Inside, they find what they came for, the golden statue of Marduk, the divine image that embodies Babylonian sovereignty. To possess this statue is to possess Babylon's soul. The Hittites carry the god away, loading sacred objects onto carts for the long journey north. The theft of Marduk represents catastrophe beyond military defeat. Without their god, the Babylonians cannot perform the New Year rituals that renew cosmic order. The king cannot grasp the hand of Marduk and receive divine sanction for his rule. The entire religious and political system that sustained the city for 3 centuries collapses with the removal of this single image. Yet the Hittites do not stay. Their kingdom lies far to the north, and holding Babylon would stretch their supply lines beyond breaking. Mursili withdraws as quickly as he came, leaving behind a shattered city and a power vacuum that others will rush to fill. The first dynasty of Babylon ends not with gradual decline, but with sudden, violent rupture. The Kassites watch from the eastern mountains. These people have served as mercenaries and laborers in Babylonian lands for generations, learning the language, adopting the customs, waiting for opportunity. Now that opportunity arrives wrapped in Hittite destruction. As smoke rises from Babylon's ruins, Kassite leaders begin their descent from the Zagros highlands, ready to claim what the Hittites have broken. The city that Hammurabi built lies wounded but not dead. Its canals still flow. Its fields still produce grain. Its scribes still remember the old ways. Babylon will rise again under foreign masters who will prove surprisingly devoted to preserving what they have conquered. The Kassites descend from the Zagros mountains like water finding its level, filling the vacuum that Hittite raiders have left behind. These highland people bring horses and patience, 2 qualities that will define their 4-century rule over Babylonia. They do not storm the wounded city as conquerors seeking plunder. They settle into it as inheritors, claiming an abandoned estate. The first Kassite king, Agum II, retrieves the stolen statue of Marduk from Hittite hands around 1560 before the Common Era. This single act reveals everything about Kassite strategy. They understand that legitimacy in Mesopotamia flows from the gods, and Marduk remains Babylon's divine heart. The statue returns to Esagila in solemn procession, and the foreign dynasty wraps itself in sacred tradition. The Kassites rename their kingdom Karduniash, yet they preserve Babylonian culture with remarkable devotion. Cuneiform scribes continue their work. Temple rituals proceed unchanged. The old hymns echo through rebuilt sanctuaries. These mountain warriors become more Babylonian than the Babylonians themselves, adopting the language, the religion, the administrative systems that Hammurabi's heirs perfected. Boundary stones called kudurus appear across the landscape, carved with divine symbols and royal grants. These black stones mark field boundaries and record land donations, their surfaces crowded with celestial emblems: the sun disk of Shamash, the crescent of Sin, the eight-pointed star of Ishtar. Each kuduru becomes a permanent witness to property rights, protected by carved curses against any who would move or destroy them. The horse transforms Casita Babylonia. These animals, rare in earlier Mesopotamia, now pull war chariots and carry messengers across the flat alluvial plain. Kassite kings breed horses with systematic care, creating royal stables that supply both military and diplomatic needs. Horses become gifts exchanged between great powers, symbols of prestige that travel from Babylon to Egypt and back. International diplomacy flourishes during the Kassite centuries. The Amarna letters, discovered in Egypt, reveal Babylonian kings corresponding with pharaohs as equals. They address each other as brothers, exchange daughters in marriage, haggle over gold shipments, and complain about diplomatic slights. Babylon stands among the great powers of the late Bronze Age, its prestige restored through patient rebuilding rather than military conquest. The city itself expands under Kassite rule. Kurigalzu I founds a new capital called Dur-Kurigalzu around 1400 before the Common Era, its ziggurat rising from the plain northwest of Babylon. This massive structure, built of millions of mud bricks reinforced with reed matting, still stands partially intact in modern Iraq. The Kassites build for eternity, their architecture solid and enduring. Scholars continue copying ancient texts, preserving Sumerian literature that might otherwise have vanished. The Epic of Gilgamesh takes its standard form during this period. Mathematical tablets multiply. Astronomical observations accumulate in temple archives. The Kassites prove themselves custodians of civilization, maintaining intellectual traditions through centuries of relative peace. Yet threats gather at the borders. Assyria rises in the north, its kings growing ambitious. Elam presses from the east, its armies raiding Babylonian territory. The Kassite dynasty weakens through succession disputes and external pressure. Around 1155, before the Common Era, Elamite forces under Shutruk-Nahunte invade Babylonia, sacking cities and carrying away treasures. The famous stele bearing Hammurabi's law code travels to Susa as war plunder, where archaeologists will discover it nearly 3,000 years later. The last Kassite king falls around 1155 before the Common Era, ending the longest dynasty in Babylonian history. 4 centuries of foreign rule have paradoxically strengthened Babylonian identity. The Kassites preserved what they found, enriched it with international connections, and passed it forward to native dynasties that would follow. Their patient stewardship kept the flame of civilization burning through an age when other Bronze Age powers collapsed entirely. The North remembers its hunger. From the highlands beyond the upper Tigris, where stone replaces mud and mountains breed harder men, Assyria rises like a predator awakening from long sleep. The centuries following Kassite collapse bring chaos to Mesopotamia, a dark age of competing dynasties and fragmented power. Into this vacuum steps a military machine unlike anything the ancient world has witnessed. Assyrian expansion begins methodically under Ashur-dan II around 911 before the Common Era, but the true transformation comes with Ashur-nasirpal II, who reigns from 883 to 859 before the Common Era. This king perfects the art of terror as statecraft. His palace reliefs at Nimrud depict flayed captives, impaled prisoners, and pyramids of severed heads. These images serve purpose beyond cruelty. They announce that resistance brings consequences beyond imagination. Babylon watches the northern shadow lengthen. The ancient city retains its religious prestige, its temples still drawing pilgrims, its priests still reading the stars. But political power has fractured among competing dynasties, Chaldean tribes in the southern marshes, Aramaean nomads in the western steppes. No single force can unite Babylonia against the coming storm. Tiglath-Pileser III, reigning from 745 to 727 before the Common Era, transforms Assyria from regional power to universal empire. His armies sweep through Syria, Palestine, and finally Babylonia itself. Rather than destroy, he adopts a subtler strategy. In 729 before the Common Era, he takes the hands of Marduk during the New Year festival, legitimizing his rule through Babylon's own sacred traditions. The conqueror becomes king of Babylon, wearing two crowns, ruling two lands. This dual monarchy proves unstable. Babylonian pride cannot accept permanent subordination. Rebellions flare repeatedly, each suppressed with increasing violence. Merodach-Baladan, a Chaldean chieftain, seizes Babylon twice, forging alliances with Elam against Assyrian domination. Each time, Assyrian armies return, each time with greater fury. The catastrophe comes under Sennacherib, who reigns from 705 to 681 before the Common Era. This king lacks his predecessor's patience with Babylonian pretensions. When rebellion erupts again in 689 before the Common Era, Sennacherib unleashes total war. His armies breach the walls, pour through the streets, and systematically demolish the sacred city. Temples that have stood for 1,000 years collapse into rubble. The great Ziggurat-Etemenanki, stairway between earth and heaven, falls stone by stone. Canals are diverted to flood the ruins, transforming urban landscape into swamp. Sennacherib boasts of his destruction in royal inscriptions. The statue of Marduk travels to Assyria as captive, the god himself made prisoner. Babylon becomes a wasteland, its population scattered, its identity seemingly erased. The conqueror believes he has solved the Babylonian problem permanently. Yet destruction breeds consequences. Sennacherib's own sons murder him in 681 before the Common Era, perhaps influenced by Babylonian priests who whisper of divine vengeance. His successor Esarhaddon immediately begins rebuilding what his father destroyed. The guilt of sacrilege weighs heavy on Assyrian conscience. Marduk's statue returns. Temples rise again from mud. Babylon proves harder to kill than any army can manage. Ashurbanipal, the last great Assyrian king, maintains uneasy control until his death around 627 before the Common Era. His magnificent library at Nineveh preserves Babylonian literature, copying tablets that might otherwise have perished. The conqueror becomes curator, the destroyer becomes preserver. Assyrian scribes copy the Epic of Gilgamesh, mathematical tables, astronomical observations, ensuring their survival across millennia. The empire of Ashur crumbles from within before any external force can deliver the final blow. Civil war tears through Assyrian heartland as princes battle for succession, generals carve personal fiefdoms, and provincial governors sense the weakness radiating from Nineveh. In this chaos, a man named Nabopolassar emerges from the marshlands of southern Babylonia, his origins obscure, his ambitions absolute. The year is 626 before the Common Era. Nabopolassar seizes Babylon not through foreign invasion but through native uprising. He claims descent from ancient Babylonian stock, positioning himself as liberator rather than conqueror. The priests of Marduk, weary of Assyrian interference in their sacred rituals, recognize his kingship. The god's statue, returned after Sennacherib's sacrilege, now blesses a new dynasty. Babylon breathes free air for the first time in generations. The struggle for independence proves neither swift nor simple. Assyrian armies march south repeatedly, besieging Babylonian cities, burning harvests, attempting to crush rebellion before it spreads. Nabopolassar fights defensive campaigns for nearly a decade, his forces outnumbered, his resources limited. The marshlands of the south provide refuge, their reed thickets and waterways confounding Assyrian chariots designed for open terrain. The turning point arrives from the east. The Medes, mountain warriors from the Iranian plateau, descend upon Assyrian territory under their king Cyaxares. These fierce horsemen harbor ancient grievances against Nineveh's domination. Nabopolassar recognizes opportunity in their aggression. Around 614 before the Common Era, Babylonian and Median forces forge alliance through royal marriage, uniting against their common enemy. The coalition proves devastating. Ashur, the ancient religious capital of Assyria, falls in 614. Its temples burn, its libraries scatter, its population flees or dies. The symbolic heart of Assyrian power stops beating. Nabopolassar personally participates in the destruction, his revenge for centuries of Babylonian humiliation made manifest in flame and blood. Nineveh follows 2 years later. The greatest city of the ancient world, seat of Ashurbanipal's magnificent library, fortress of seemingly invincible kings, collapses under combined assault. The Tigris River, swollen by unusual floods, breaches the walls. Median and Babylonian soldiers pour through the gaps. The last Assyrian king dies in the conflagration, his palace burning around him. The empire that terrorized the Near East for 3 centuries vanishes in a single catastrophic summer. Nabopolassar claims the inheritance. Babylonian armies pursue fleeing Assyrian remnants westward, preventing any revival. Egyptian forces march north to support their former Assyrian allies, recognizing that Babylon's rise threatens their own regional ambitions. The Battle of Carchemish in 605 before the Common Era, commanded by Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar while his aging father remains in Babylon, destroys Egyptian intervention. Syria and Palestine fall under Babylonian control. The founder dies that same year, his life's work complete. From obscure marsh chieftain to master of Mesopotamia, Nabopolassar transforms Babylon from Assyrian vassal into imperial capital. He rebuilds temples neglected during foreign domination, restores festivals interrupted by war, and initiates construction projects that his son will complete in spectacular fashion. The Ziggurat Etemenanki rises higher, its mud brick mass proclaiming renewed Babylonian confidence. His legacy extends beyond military triumph. Nabopolassar establishes administrative systems that will govern the Neo-Babylonian Empire for 7 decades. He cultivates priestly support through generous temple endowments. He positions Babylon not merely as political center, but as cosmic axis, the place where heaven and earth connect through Marduk's presence. The liberation he achieves becomes foundation for the greatest flowering of Babylonian civilization, since Hammurabi walked these same streets 12 centuries earlier. The crown prince becomes king in the field, far from Babylon's walls, when messengers bring word of Nabopolassar's death in the summer of 605 before Christ. Nebuchadnezzar races home across the desert, securing his throne within 3 weeks, then returns immediately to campaign. Egypt has challenged Babylonian supremacy at Carchemish, and the young king crushes Pharaoh Necho's forces so completely that Egyptian power retreats behind the Sinai for generations. Victory establishes his military reputation, but warfare interests this king less than what he builds upon returning home. The transformation begins immediately. Nebuchadnezzar inherits a city still scarred by Assyrian destruction, its walls breached, its temples damaged, its glory diminished. He envisions something unprecedented, not merely restoration but reinvention, a capital worthy of Marduk's eternal presence, a metropolis that will dwarf every city the ancient world has known. Workers stream into Babylon by the tens of thousands. Brick kilns burn continuously. The Euphrates itself becomes construction material, its clay shaped into millions of mud bricks that rise toward heaven. The inner walls climb first, massive fortifications stretching over 6 miles around the urban core. These walls stand so thick that chariots can race along their tops. Towers punctuate the circuit at regular intervals, each one a fortress capable of independent defense. Beyond these inner defenses, outer walls extend the protected zone, creating a double barrier that military engineers consider impregnable. Moats filled with Euphrates water complete the defensive system, transforming Babylon into an island fortress within the Mesopotamian plain. The ziggurat Etemenanki rises to its final height during these decades, its 7 terraces climbing nearly 300 feet above the surrounding flatland. This is the structure that travelers will remember, the tower that inspires biblical legend, the stairway connecting earth to heaven. Its base covers an area larger than 3 football fields, its mass requiring more bricks than any single structure previously attempted. At its summit, a temple sheathed in blue-glazed tiles catches the sun, visible for miles across the alluvial plain. The processional way extends from the Ishtar Gate through the city's heart, its walls lined with glazed brick lions that seem to pace alongside festival processions. Each lion measures over 6 feet in length, molded in relief, colored in ochre and white against brilliant blue backgrounds. 60 lions guard each side of this sacred avenue, 120 predators frozen in eternal vigilance. The street itself paves with limestone and red breccia, stones imported from distant quarries at enormous expense. Palaces multiply across the royal quarter. The southern palace serves as administrative center, its throne room decorated with glazed brick patterns depicting stylized trees and lions. The northern palace rises for ceremonial functions. A summer palace stands beyond the walls, offering retreat from urban heat. Each complex contains hundreds of rooms, courtyards planted with exotic trees, storage magazines holding tribute from conquered territories. The king's building inscriptions survive by the thousands, stamped into bricks throughout the city. They proclaim his titles, invoke Marduk's blessing, and document specific construction projects with bureaucratic precision. These texts reveal a ruler obsessed with architectural permanence, convinced that buildings outlast military conquests, that walls and temples speak across centuries when armies are forgotten. Temple restoration proceeds simultaneously across the empire. Nebuchadnezzar rebuilds sanctuaries in Sippar, Larsa, Uruk, and dozens of smaller cities, binding provincial populations to Babylonian religious authority through architectural patronage. Each restoration reinforces the theological claim that Babylon stands as cosmic center, that Marduk rules supreme among gods, that the king serves as divine agent on earth. The city swells to perhaps 200,000 inhabitants, the largest urban concentration the ancient world has witnessed. Streets follow grid patterns where new construction permits. Canals thread through neighborhoods, providing water, transportation, and sewage removal. Markets cluster near gates and harbors. Residential quarters house populations ranging from wealthy merchants in spacious courtyard homes to laborers crowded into single rooms. This is the Babylon that will haunt human memory for millennia, the city whose walls Herodotus will describe with wonder, whose gardens will become legendary, whose fall will inspire prophetic literature across multiple religious traditions. The gate rises from the earth like a vision made solid, its surface blazing with a blue, so intense that travelers approaching from the northern road must shield their eyes against the glare. Lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan has been ground to powder and mixed with silica, copper compounds, and closely guarded secrets known only to the royal workshops. The result transforms ordinary clay into something approaching the color of heaven itself. Nebuchadnezzar has commanded that Babylon's northern entrance become the most magnificent gateway ever constructed by human hands. The Ishtar Gate stands nearly 50 feet tall, its double archway flanked by towers that pierce the sky. Every surface bears decoration. Alternating rows of bulls and dragons march across the blue field in raised relief, their forms molded from brick before firing, each animal composed of dozens of individual pieces fitted together with precision that defies the material's humble origins. The bulls represent Adad, storm god whose thunder rolls across the plain. Their muscular bodies ripple with power, horns curved forward in eternal threat. The dragons belong to Marduk himself, composite creatures called Mushusu, combining serpent head, feline forepaws, eagle talons on the hind legs, and scorpion tail. These fantastic beasts guard the sacred precinct with supernatural vigilance, their yellow and white forms standing vivid against the overwhelming blue. The processional way extends from the gate toward the temple complex, a corridor of wonder stretching nearly half a mile. Lions stride along both walls, 60 of each side, their mouths open in silent roars. These are the sacred animals of Ishtar, goddess of love and war, and they escort all who walk this path toward the divine presence. The pavement beneath consists of limestone slabs, each inscribed with Nebuchadnezzar's name and titles, so that every footstep treads upon royal proclamation. The New Year festival transforms this architectural wonder into living theater. Each spring, when the barley ripens and the Euphrates swells with mountain snowmelt, Babylon celebrates the Akitu. For 11 days, the city becomes the stage for cosmic drama. Marduk's statue emerges from Esagila, carried by priests through streets lined with worshippers. The king himself walks the processional way, stripped of royal insignia, humbled before the god he serves. At the Akitu house beyond the walls, rituals reenact creation itself. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's great creation epic, is recited in full. Marduk defeats the chaos dragon Tiamat, fashions heaven and earth from her corpse, creates humanity from the blood of a rebellious god. The king's power is renewed through sacred marriage rites. The coming year's fate is determined through divination. Babylon reaffirms its place at the center of cosmic order. The glazing technology represents centuries of accumulated knowledge. Craftsmen control kiln temperatures with extraordinary precision, understanding that slight variations produce different colors. The blue requires specific mineral combinations fired at exact temperatures. Yellow comes from lead antimonate. White demands tin oxide. Each brick must be fired separately, then assembled like an enormous puzzle, with registration marks ensuring proper alignment. Workshops near the palace employ hundreds of specialists. Clay preparers remove impurities and achieve consistent texture. Mold makers carve the relief forms in negative. Glaziers mix and apply the colored compounds. Kiln masters tend fires for days, controlling heat through ventilation adjustments. Assemblers fit the finished pieces into walls, filling gaps with mortar tinted to match surrounding colors. The gate and processional way serve purposes beyond mere display. They demonstrate Babylonian mastery over materials, organization, and cosmic forces. Foreign ambassadors walking this corridor understand immediately that they approach power beyond their comprehension. Tributary kings bringing gifts recognize their subordinate status before reaching any throne room. The architecture itself negotiates political relationships. This is propaganda rendered in fired clay, theology expressed through color and form, imperial ideology made permanent in glazed brick that will outlast the empire itself. The empire that builds gates of glazed lions also builds siege ramps of packed earth. Nebuchadnezzar turns his attention westward, toward the small kingdoms clinging to the Mediterranean coast, toward tribute that flows irregularly, toward a city perched on Judean hills that has tested Babylonian patience for too long. Jerusalem sits at the crossroads of empires, a prize too small to ignore and too stubborn to submit. The kingdom of Judah has survived Assyrian devastation, has watched the northern kingdom of Israel vanish into deportation a century earlier, has learned nothing from that catastrophe. Its kings played dangerous games, accepting Babylonian overlordship when armies approach, then conspiring with Egypt the moment those armies withdraw. The first siege comes in 597 before the Common Era. Babylonian forces surround the city during the reign of young King Jehoiakim, who has ruled only 3 months. The siege is brief. Jerusalem's walls cannot withstand the engineering that conquered Nineveh. The gates open. Jehoiakim surrenders himself, his mother, his officials, his craftsmen. Nebuchadnezzar strips the temple of its golden vessels, empties the royal treasury, and deports the king along with 10,000 of Judah's elite to Babylon. This should have ended the matter. Nebuchadnezzar installs Zedekiah as puppet king, extracts oaths of loyalty, and withdraws. The deportees settle along Babylonian canals, establishing communities that will outlast the empire itself. The temple still stands, Jerusalem still breathes. But Zedekiah listens to prophets promising Egyptian salvation, to advisors dreaming of independence, to voices that mistake Babylonian patience for weakness. He rebels. The second siege begins in 588 before the Common Era and lasts 18 months. This time there will be no mercy. Babylonian engineers construct siege works around the entire city, cutting supply lines, starving the population. Egyptian forces march north to relieve the siege, but retreat without engaging. Jerusalem stands alone. The walls breach in the summer of 586. Zedekiah flees by night through a gate near the royal gardens, heading toward the Jordan Valley. Babylonian cavalry captures him near Jericho. They bring him before Nebuchadnezzar at Riblah, where the king of Babylon pronounces judgment. Zedekiah watches his sons executed before his eyes, then those eyes are put out. He travels to Babylon in chains, blind, childless, the last king of David's line to rule in Jerusalem. The city burns. Nebuzaradan, captain of the imperial guard, supervises systematic destruction. The temple that Solomon built 4 centuries earlier, the house where the God of Israel dwelt between cherubim wings, collapses into flame and rubble. Its bronze pillars, its great basin called the sea, its ritual implements, all are broken apart and carried to Babylon. The palace burns, the walls are torn down, Jerusalem becomes a heap of stones. More deportations follow. The skilled, the educated, the potentially dangerous, all march eastward along roads their ancestors once traveled as free traders. They settle in communities around Nippur, along the Chabar Canal, in neighborhoods that preserve their identity through exile. They weep by Babylonian rivers, remembering Zion. Yet destruction breeds memory more durable than stone. Scribes among the exiles begin collecting, editing, preserving the texts that will become scripture. The loss of temple and kingdom forces theological revolution. God cannot be confined to one building, one city, one land. The exiles discover portable faith, worship without sacrifice, identity maintained through text and practice rather than territory. Babylon intends to absorb these deportees as it has absorbed countless others. Instead, the exile creates something unprecedented, a people defined not by place, but by covenant, by law, by memory of destruction and hope of return. The very catastrophe Nebuchadnezzar inflicts ensures that his victims will remember him forever, will write his name into texts that outlive his empire by millennia. The king who destroys Jerusalem also builds paradise. Within the same decade that sees Judean captives marched through the Ishtar Gate, Nebuchadnezzar commands his engineers to raise gardens that will defy the flat monotony of the Mesopotamian plain. The contrast defines his reign. Devastation abroad, splendor at home, the wealth of conquered nations transformed into wonders that make Babylon the envy of the ancient world. The palace complex sprawls across the northern quarter of the city, a labyrinth of courtyards, throne rooms, administrative chambers, and private apartments that covers more ground than many entire cities. Walls of mud brick rise to heights that dwarf approaching visitors, their surfaces sheathed in glazed tiles depicting lions, palm trees, and geometric patterns in blues, yellows, and whites. The throne room alone stretches nearly 60 meters in length, its facade blazing with enameled lions that seem to pace eternally through stylized vegetation. But the gardens capture imagination beyond all other marvels. Ancient sources describe terraces rising in tiers above the Euphrates, planted with trees whose roots drink from hidden channels, while their branches shade walkways far above the dusty streets. The engineering required to lift water to such heights represents a triumph of hydraulic knowledge, accumulated over 2 millennia. Chain pumps worked by slaves or oxen draw river water upward through concealed pipes. Bitumen waterproofs the platforms that support tons of soil. Drainage systems prevent the weight of saturated earth from collapsing the structures beneath. Whether these gardens match later Greek descriptions remains uncertain. The hanging gardens that Hellenic writers place among the 7 wonders of the world may blend memory with imagination, actual Babylonian achievement with legendary embellishment. No cuneiform text from Nebuchadnezzar's reign explicitly describes such a structure. Yet the king's own inscriptions boast endlessly of his building projects, of palaces raised like mountains, of gardens planted for his pleasure. The royal household that inhabits these spaces operates as a complex institution, employing thousands. Queens maintain separate establishments with their own administrators, servants, and income. The principal queen, possibly the Median princess whose homesickness allegedly inspired the gardens, commands resources rivaling those of provincial governors. Secondary wives, concubines, and their children occupy hierarchies of their own, each rank reflected in apartment size, servant allocation, and access to the king's presence. Eunuchs manage the inner palace, trusted precisely because they cannot establish competing dynasties. These castrated administrators rise to positions of enormous influence, controlling access to the monarch, managing royal correspondence, overseeing the education of princes. Their loyalty, purchased through dependence, makes them indispensable to rulers who trust no one with intact ambitions. The kitchens that feed this population process staggering quantities of grain, meat, fish, vegetables, and fruit. Beer flows in rivers, the staple beverage of all Mesopotamian civilization, brewed in varieties ranging from thin daily rations to thick ceremonial ales. Wine arrives from northern vineyards, a luxury that marks elite tables. Dates provide sweetness, sesame yields oil, and spices from distant lands, flavor dishes served on bronze and ceramic vessels. Craftsmen attached to the palace produce luxury goods that never reach markets. Goldsmiths fashion jewelry for royal women. Weavers create textiles of such fineness that a single garment represents months of labor. Perfumers blend oils and resins into fragrances that mask the inevitable odors of a city built on mud. Musicians practice instruments whose sounds will accompany royal banquets, religious ceremonies, and private entertainments. The gardens, whether real or elaborated through memory, represent something beyond mere luxury. They embody the Babylonian king's role as cosmic gardener, the one who brings order to chaos, fertility to barrenness, life to the desert. The same irrigation expertise that makes agriculture possible across southern Mesopotamia here creates an artificial mountain green with impossible vegetation. The king who controls water controls life itself. Nebuchadnezzar's inscriptions reveal a monarch obsessed with building, with leaving monuments that will preserve his name through ages. Every brick stamped with his titles, every wall inscribed with his deeds, every garden planted for his glory serves this immortality project. The exiles weeping by Babylon's rivers see only their captivity. The king sees eternity raising in glazed brick and irrigated terraces, paradise engineered from mud and ambition. The monuments rise on foundations of silver. Behind every glazed brick, every irrigated terrace, every temple restored to magnificence, flows a current of commerce so vast that it transforms the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar builds with ambition, but he pays with the profits of an empire that has become the crossroads of civilization. The harbors along the Euphrates never sleep. Boats laden with cedar from Lebanon dock alongside vessels carrying copper from Cyprus, tin from distant lands beyond the eastern mountains, gold from Egypt, spices from Arabia. The river itself becomes a highway of wealth, its waters bearing the raw materials that feed Babylonian workshops and the finished goods that travel outward to every corner of the known world. Quays stretch for miles along the waterfront, their wooden docks groaning under bales of wool, amphorae of wine, baskets of dates, and ingots of precious metals. The counting houses of the Egibi family rise near the temple district, their mud-brick walls enclosing archives that record generations of commercial transactions. This single family operates what later ages would recognize as a banking empire. They accept deposits of silver, extend credit to merchants, manage agricultural estates, collect debts, and facilitate trade across distances that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. Their clay tablets, inscribed in careful cuneiform, document loans with interest, property transfers, partnership agreements, and complex financial instruments that anticipate modern commerce by 2.5 millennia. Caravans depart from Babylon's gates before dawn, their donkeys laden with textiles dyed in brilliant colors, their guards armed against bandits who haunt the desert routes. These merchant trains connect Babylon to the Mediterranean coast, to the Arabian Peninsula, to the highlands of Persia, to lands so distant that their names appear only as rumors in the archives. The caravan masters know every watering hole, every safe campsite, every tribal territory through which they must negotiate passage. They carry letters of credit that allow them to conduct business without transporting dangerous quantities of silver through lawless regions. The Temple of Marduk functions as both religious center and economic engine. Its vast estates produce grain, dates, wool, and livestock. Its workshops employ hundreds of craftsmen. Its administrators manage a portfolio of loans, rentals, and commercial investments that rivals any private banking house. The boundary between sacred and commercial blurs entirely in Babylonian practice. Priests calculate interest rates with the same precision they use to track celestial movements. Textile workshops cluster in specific quarters of the city, their looms producing woolen fabrics that command premium prices throughout the ancient world. Babylonian purple competes with Phoenician dye. Babylonian weaving techniques influence fashion from Egypt to Persia. The weavers work in organized manufactories, their output carefully recorded, their wages paid in silver or rations of barley and oil. The silver standard that governs Babylonian commerce creates a sophisticated monetary economy. Merchants weigh silver on precision scales, cutting ingots into exact amounts for each transaction. The shekel becomes a universal measure of value, its weight standardized across the empire. Credit flows freely between trusted partners, allowing commerce to expand beyond the limitations of physical currency. The Egibi archives reveal a world of complex contracts, of partnerships that span generations, of wealth accumulated through patient investment rather than conquest alone. These merchant families intermarry, creating networks of commercial alliance that parallel the political structures of empire. Their sons learn cuneiform not for literary purposes, but for business correspondence, for the endless documentation that Babylonian commerce demands. The empire of trade outlasts the empire of conquest. When Persian armies eventually march through Babylon's gates, the counting houses continue their calculations, the caravans resume their journeys, the harbors receive their cargoes. Commerce adapts to new masters while preserving the networks, the techniques, the financial instruments that Babylonian merchants perfected across centuries of patient accumulation. The temples endure because the temples remember. While merchants calculate profits and kings wage wars, the priests of Marduk maintain rituals unchanged across millennia, their daily ministrations connecting the present to the deepest Sumerian past. Within the Esagila complex, the great temple of Marduk at Babylon's heart, hundreds of clergy perform the endless work of keeping cosmic order intact. The high priest rises before dawn each day, purifying himself in sacred waters before entering the innermost sanctuary where Marduk's golden statue sits enthroned. He whispers prayers in archaic Sumerian, a language dead to common speech but alive in liturgy. He presents offerings of bread, beer, roasted meat, the god's daily meal consumed through sacred fire and priestly consumption of the remainder. This ritual has continued without interruption since Hammurabi's time, perhaps longer. The temple economy rivals the merchant houses in complexity. Esagila owns vast agricultural estates, employs thousands of workers, maintains its own scribal schools and astronomical observatories. Temple slaves tend sacred flocks. Temple brewers produce ritual beer. Temple weavers create the garments that clothe divine statues, changed with the seasons in elaborate ceremonies. The New Year festival, the Akitu, brings the entire city into 11 days of ritual drama, the king himself humiliated before Marduk's statue, stripped of regalia, slapped by the high priest, forced to declare his innocence of neglecting the god. Among the workers, the scribes, the craftsmen serving Babylon's temples, walk the exiles from Judah. 3 deportations have brought thousands of Jews to Mesopotamia, the elite of a conquered kingdom now scattered across the empire's heartland. They settle in communities along the canals, in neighborhoods where Hebrew mingles with Aramaic and Akkadian. They maintain their own traditions, their own priesthood, their own memories of a temple now reduced to ash and rubble. The Jewish community adapts and endures. Elders gather to preserve the stories of their ancestors, the laws of Moses, the songs of David. Without a temple, sacrifice becomes impossible, so prayer and study emerge as substitutes. The synagogue, the house of assembly, begins its evolution here in Babylonian exile. Scribes compile and edit the ancient texts, creating the foundations of what will become the Hebrew Bible. The experience of exile shapes Jewish identity permanently, the trauma transformed into theological meaning. Prophets speak among the exiles. Ezekiel receives visions by the Kabar Canal, seeing wheels within wheels, divine glory departing Jerusalem and arriving in Babylon. The anonymous prophet scholars call 2nd Isaiah proclaims comfort to the captives, promising return and restoration. These voices interpret catastrophe as divine punishment and exile as purification, finding meaning in suffering that might otherwise destroy a people's faith entirely. The stories of Daniel emerge from this context, tales of a wise Jewish courtier navigating Babylonian power. The fiery furnace, the lion's den, the handwriting on the wall, these narratives teach survival strategies for a minority community within an overwhelming empire. Maintain faith privately while serving foreign masters publicly. Trust that divine justice will ultimately vindicate the faithful. The stories blend historical memory with theological imagination, creating literature that will outlast Babylon itself. The priests of Marduk and the elders of Judah inhabit the same city, but different universes of meaning. Both claim exclusive truth. Both maintain ancient traditions against the erosions of time. Both believe their God supreme. Yet they coexist within Babylon's cosmopolitan tolerance, the empire caring little what its subjects believe, so long as they pay taxes and keep peace. This religious diversity characterizes the empire's final decades. Aramean gods, Arabian deities, Egyptian cults, Persian beliefs all find adherents within Babylon's walls. The city becomes a laboratory of religious encounter, ideas flowing between traditions, astronomical knowledge shared across priestly boundaries. The Jews learn Babylonian calendar systems, adopt Babylonian month names, absorb Babylonian flood narratives into their own scriptures. The temples continue their rituals as political storms gather. Priests observe omens in sheep livers and star movements, recording signs that suggest coming transformation. The gods speak through entrails and eclipses, their messages requiring expert interpretation. Whether Marduk or Yahweh will prove supreme, only time will reveal. The transformation comes not through conquest, but through coronation. In 556 before the Common Era, a man unlike any previous Babylonian king ascends the throne. Nabonidus emerges from obscurity, his path to power shrouded in palace intrigue and possible conspiracy. His mother serves as priestess of the moon god Sin at Haran, far to the north. This maternal devotion shapes everything that follows. The new king immediately reveals his theological priorities. Where every Babylonian monarch before him honored Marduk as supreme deity, Nabonidus elevates Sin above all gods. He restores the ancient temple at Haran, lavishing resources on the moon god's sanctuary, while Babylon's own Esagila receives diminished attention. The Marduk priesthood watches with growing alarm as their king redirects sacred resources toward a rival cult. The crisis deepens when Nabonidus makes an unprecedented decision. In 553, he departs Babylon for the Arabian oasis of Tamar, leaving his son Belshazzar as regent. The king remains absent for 10 years. 10 years without the monarch performing the essential New Year rituals. 10 years without the sacred handclasp between king and Marduk's statue. 10 years during which the Akitu festival cannot properly occur. The theological implications prove devastating. Babylonian kingship requires divine legitimation renewed annually through elaborate ceremonies. The king must grasp Marduk's hands, receive the god's blessing, hear the high priest recite the royal duties. Without this ritual, the cosmic order itself seems threatened. Crops may fail, enemies may triumph, the gods may withdraw their protection. Tamar becomes Nabonidus's alternative capital. The remote oasis sits along Arabian trade routes, offering access to incense commerce and strategic position. The king builds palaces, establishes garrisons, extends Babylonian influence into territories never before claimed. His Arabian project represents genuine imperial expansion, yet it comes at the cost of religious legitimacy at home. The Marduk priests compose bitter texts condemning their absent monarch. They accuse him of madness, of impiety, of abandoning sacred duties for foreign gods. These propagandistic documents, later discovered by archaeologists, reveal the depth of institutional opposition. The priesthood that controls Babylon's temples, manages its astronomical observations, and maintains its intellectual traditions, turns decisively against its own king. Belshazzar governs competently, but cannot substitute for legitimate royal presence. He conducts state business, commands armies, manages administration. Yet he cannot perform the rituals requiring the king himself. Each passing year without proper Akitu ceremonies compounds the theological crisis. The empire functions administratively while rotting spiritually. Nabonidus finally returns to Babylon around 543. but reconciliation proves impossible. The damage to his relationship with the Marduk priesthood cannot be repaired. His continued promotion of sin worship alienates the very religious establishment that legitimizes Babylonian kingship. The temples that should support the throne instead pray for deliverance. Meanwhile, a new power rises in the east. Cyrus of Persia conquers Media, defeats Lydia, absorbs vast territories. His empire grows while Babylon's internal divisions deepen. The Marduk priests begin viewing this foreign conqueror not as threat, but as potential liberator. A king who honors their god might prove preferable to one who neglects him. The astronomical tablets continue recording celestial movements with precision unchanged by political turmoil. Scribes note eclipses, planetary positions, stellar risings. This scientific work proceeds regardless of which god receives royal favor. Yet the same priests who calculate celestial mechanics also interpret omens suggesting divine displeasure with their current monarch. The empire's final years unfold under gathering shadows. Trade continues, temples function, administration persists. But the fundamental bond between king and god lies broken. Nabonidus has committed the unforgivable sin of preferring foreign deity over Babylon's own patron. When Cyrus finally approaches, he will find gates opened by priests who consider Persian conquest divine judgment upon a heretic king. The empire that has endured for 13 centuries falls in a single night. The Persian army approaches from the north in the autumn of 539 before the Common Era, led by Cyrus, whom his own people call the Great King, King of Kings, King of Anshan and Persia. His forces have already absorbed Media, Lydia, and the Greek cities of Anatolia. Now they march towards the greatest prize remaining in the ancient world. Nabonidus returns from his Arabian exile too late. The king who abandoned Marduk's festivals now attempts to rally a city whose priests consider him apostate. He gathers the statues of provincial gods within Babylon's walls, believing divine images will protect the capital. Instead, this concentration of sacred objects strips the provinces of their protectors, leaving outer territories defenseless against Persian advance. The Babylonian army meets Cyrus at Opis on the Tigris River. The battle proves brief and decisive. Persian cavalry overwhelms Babylonian infantry. Survivors scatter. The road to Babylon lies open. Yet the city itself remains formidable. Walls rise over 80 feet high, thick enough for chariots to pass upon their summits. The Euphrates flows through the urban center, providing water and creating natural barriers. Siege warfare against such defenses could consume years. Cyrus chooses engineering over assault. His forces dig channels upstream, diverting the Euphrates into marshlands and artificial basins. The river level drops. What once flowed chest-deep through Babylon's water gates now barely reaches a soldier's thigh. The night of the conquest arrives during a festival. Some sources suggest the celebration of the new year, others a different observance. Regardless, the city's attention focuses inward on ritual and revelry. Guards along the river walls grow complacent. The water gates stand open, designed to admit the river's flow rather than repel invaders. Persian soldiers wade through the diminished waters in darkness. They emerge within the city walls before alarm spreads. The outer districts fall silently. By the time defenders understand what occurs, enemy forces control key positions throughout the urban center. The conquest proves remarkably bloodless. No great sack occurs. No mass slaughter fills the streets. Persian discipline holds. Cyrus has promised his soldiers plunder, but he has also promised Babylon's priests restoration of proper worship. Both promises require the city to survive intact. Nabonidus flees but finds capture inevitable. His fate remains unclear in surviving records, though some accounts suggest comfortable exile rather than execution. The heretic king who abandoned Marduk meets an end more pathetic than tragic. Cyrus enters Babylon as liberator rather than conqueror. The cylinder inscription he commissions presents his conquest as divine intervention. Marduk himself, angered by Nabonidus's neglect, searched among all lands for a righteous ruler. The god found Cyrus, took his hand, called him by name, and delivered Babylon into Persian hands without battle. This narrative serves multiple purposes. It legitimizes foreign rule through native theology. It presents conquest as restoration rather than destruction. It transforms military victory into religious vindication. The priests of Marduk embrace this interpretation. Their temples receive renewed patronage. Their festivals resume proper observance. Their god's statue returns to prominence. Whatever private reservations they harbor about Persian overlordship, public collaboration proves preferable to the neglect they suffered under their own king. The Jewish exiles receive particular attention. Cyrus issues decrees permitting their return to Jerusalem, authorizing temple reconstruction, restoring sacred vessels Nebuchadnezzar had seized. These acts earn him the title of Messiah in Hebrew scripture, the anointed instrument of divine purpose. Babylon itself continues. The city remains administrative capital of the richest satrapy in the Persian Empire. Trade flows, temples function, scribes record. The astronomical observations proceed without interruption, their precision unaffected by political transformation. Yet something fundamental has ended. For 13 centuries, Babylon ruled itself or struggled toward independence. Now it becomes a provincial capital within a larger imperial system. The city that once commanded empires now receives commands from Persepolis and Susa. The walls still stand. The Ishtar Gate still blazes blue. The ziggurat still rises toward heaven. But the spirit that built them belongs to a world that passed in a single autumn night, when the rivers ran dry and foreign soldiers walked through the waters into the heart of civilization itself. The conqueror arrives not as destroyer but as heir. In 331 before the Common Era, Alexander of Macedon enters Babylon through the Ishtar Gate, his cavalry passing beneath the same glazed lions that watched Nebuchadnezzar's triumphs 2 centuries earlier. The Persian garrison offers no resistance. The priests of Marduk welcome him with ancient rituals, recognizing in this young king a potential restorer of Babylonian glory. Alexander understands what he has inherited. He orders the restoration of Esagila, the great temple complex that Persian neglect has allowed to decay. He commands the rebuilding of Etemenanki, the ziggurat whose crumbling terraces still dominate the skyline. The Macedonian king performs sacrifices to Marduk, adopting the religious obligations that Nabonidus once abandoned. For a brief moment, Babylon glimpses resurrection. The city becomes Alexander's chosen capital. He envisions it as the center of a world empire stretching from Greece to India, from Egypt to the steppes of Central Asia. Engineers survey the harbors. Architects draft plans for new palaces. The ancient metropolis that once commanded the known world prepares to command it again under a foreign king who honors its gods and respects its traditions. But the dream dies with the dreamer. In June of 323 before the Common Era, Alexander succumbs to fever in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. He is 32 years old. His generals gather around his deathbed, asking to whom he leaves his empire. The answer, if he gives one, satisfies no one. Within hours of his death, the empire begins fragmenting. The wars of succession devastate Babylon. Alexander's generals fight for decades, their armies marching through Mesopotamia repeatedly. Seleucus eventually claims the eastern territories, but he builds his capital elsewhere. Seleucia on the Tigris rises 70 kilometers north, drawing population, commerce, and administrative functions away from the ancient city. Babylon becomes a secondary center in a kingdom named for its conqueror. The decline proceeds gradually but inexorably. The canals that sustained agriculture for millennia require constant maintenance. Without royal attention, they silt. Fields that produced abundant harvests become saline marshes or desert. The population that once numbered hundreds of thousands dwindles to tens of thousands, then fewer. Neighborhoods empty. Temples lose their congregations. Yet the intellectual traditions persist with remarkable tenacity. Babylonian astronomers continue their observations, recording celestial phenomena with precision that Greek scholars admire and adopt. The mathematical systems developed over 2 millennia remain in use. Cuneiform tablets are still inscribed in the 1st century before the Common Era, preserving knowledge accumulated since the age of Hammurabi. The physical city crumbles. Mud brick architecture requires constant renewal. Without resources for maintenance, walls dissolve in winter rains. Roofs collapse. The great monuments that once proclaimed imperial power become quarries for local construction. The glazed bricks of the Ishtar Gate are carried away piece by piece. The ziggurat, never fully restored, erodes into a shapeless mound. By the time of the Common Era, Babylon has become a village amid ruins. Travelers describe vast mounds where palaces once stood, canals choked with reeds, temples open to the sky. The city that invented urban civilization returns to the earth from which it rose. Sand drifts through the processional way. Jackals den in the chambers where kings once held court. The gods depart last. The priests of Marduk maintain their rituals as long as worshippers remain, but eventually the temples fall silent. The astronomical observations cease. The last cuneiform tablet is inscribed. A tradition stretching back 3,000 years ends not with conquest, but with quiet abandonment. What remains is memory transformed into legend. The Tower of Babel enters scripture. The hanging gardens become a wonder of the ancient world. Babylon itself becomes a symbol, a name invoked to represent both human achievement and human pride. The actual city disappears beneath accumulated centuries, waiting for archaeologists to rediscover what time and neglect have buried. The buried city sleeps beneath Iraqi soil for nearly 2,000 years before European explorers arrive seeking the legendary metropolis. In 1899, German archaeologist Robert Koldewey begins systematic excavation at the mound called Babel, and brick by brick, the processional way emerges from the earth. The Ishtar Gate rises again, its blue-glazed lions and dragons reassembled in Berlin's Pergamon Museum, where millions will gaze upon Nebuchadnezzar's glory. Yet the physical resurrection matters less than what never required excavation. Babylon's intellectual legacy flows unbroken through every subsequent civilization. Greek astronomers inherit Babylonian star catalogues, zodiacal divisions, and mathematical methods. the 360 degrees of a circle, the 60 minutes of an hour, the 60 seconds of a minute. These base 60 calculations originate in Mesopotamian counting houses and temple observatories. Every clock, every compass, every astronomical calculation carries Babylonian mathematics forward through time. The legal tradition proves equally enduring. Hammurabi's principle that law should be written, public, and consistently applied influences every subsequent legal code. Persian, Greek, Roman, and eventually European jurisprudence builds upon this foundation. The concept that rulers govern through law rather than arbitrary whim, that justice requires predictable standards. These ideas first crystallize in Babylon and spread outward through conquest, trade, and cultural transmission. Literature carries the deepest echoes. The Epic of Gilgamesh, preserved on clay tablets in Nineveh's library, contains flood narratives, garden paradises, and serpent tempters that resonate through later religious texts. Biblical writers in Babylonian exile absorb Mesopotamian creation stories, transforming them into Genesis. The Tower of Babel becomes eternal metaphor for human ambition, confronting divine limits. Babylon itself enters Scripture as symbol of worldly corruption, ensuring the city's name survives even as its ruins crumble. The astronomical observations prove most practically valuable. Babylonian priests tracked planetary movements for over 7 centuries, creating datasets that enabled prediction of eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and celestial cycles. Greek astronomers, particularly Hipparchus and Ptolemy, build their models upon this foundation. The scientific revolution of the 17th century ultimately rests upon astronomical traditions stretching back to Mesopotamian ziggurats. Modern archaeology continues revealing new dimensions. Cuneiform tablets emerge from museum basements, their contents finally deciphered after a century of scholarly work. Business records illuminate ancient commerce. Medical texts reveal sophisticated diagnostic traditions. Mathematical tablets demonstrate algebraic thinking 2 millennia before European mathematicians. Each translation expands understanding of how thoroughly Babylonian knowledge permeated subsequent cultures. The physical site endures as contested heritage. Saddam Hussein rebuilt portions of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, inscribing his own name on new bricks laid atop ancient foundations. American military forces established a base within the archaeological zone during the 2003 invasion, damaging irreplaceable remains. Iraqi archaeologists now work to preserve what survives, while political instability threatens continued excavation. The legacy transcends any single inheritance. When astronomers calculate planetary orbits, they use Babylonian mathematics. When lawyers cite precedent, they follow Babylonian legal principles. When storytellers craft flood narratives or tower myths, they echo Babylonian literature. The civilization that rose between 2 rivers shaped human thought so fundamentally that its influence becomes invisible through sheer ubiquity. Babylon endures not in stone, but in structure. The frameworks of law, science, literature, and timekeeping that organize human civilization itself. The gate of the gods remains open, and humanity continues passing through. Thank you for journeying through 3,000 years of Babylonian history. If these stories of ancient civilizations fascinate you, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next documentary exploration into the worlds that shaped our own.